Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of r/ProRevenge. In today's episode, want some free gas? I gotcha bro. But I didn't retire. My boss thought she could insult everyone, so I made her pay everyone for going on vacations. Before we get started, make sure to subscribe so you will never miss a video. So let's get started. Want some free gas? I gotcha bro. Hope this qualifies as pro-revenge. Let me know if needs removing. So several years ago, my friend, we'll call him Boris, and I would always help each other do the spring cleanup for our properties. This included taking out damaged trees, preparing garden plots, and taking care of our weed-infested yards. I was going to be first on the cleanup detail, so I prepared tools and implements the Friday before the big cleanup was to happen. Sharpening tools and chainsaw chains, lawn mower blade, and just getting everything in order. Among those tasks was mixing had with 2-cycle oil. Finished up kind of late and generally put things away for the next day. The next morning Boris shows up with coffee and biscuits around 8 a.m. As we were sitting on his tailgate enjoying breakfast, my neighbors ride by in their beat-to-hell Chevy Cavalier smoking like a freight train. We will call them Rocky and Bullwinkle. Boris and I made the usual jokes about the amount of smoke pouring from the exhaust. Bet they go to the gas station and fill up with oil and check the gas. We soon finished breakfast and thought no more about it. As we begin to get the tools laid out and has out a plan of attack, I cannot find my gas cans. No mixed gas, regular gas, or a gas can in general. That's when it dawned on us why the car Rocky and Bullwinkle were driving was smoking so bad. I'm pissed to say the least. Well, all Boris and I could do was go shopping for gas cans, gas, and more 2-cycle oil. After we returned, we saw Rocky and Bullwinkle pass by several times, but all in all, we got a lot done. The next weekend we dedicated to clean up at Boris's. A weekend or two go by and we have a family dinner at my wife's, Rocky and Bullwinkle's grandparents'. Toward the latter part of the evening we were having a few drinks. Most people had left and myself and wife's grandfather were shooting the breeze when I had to take a leak. As I was doing so, I saw a gas can with very distinct paint on it. I inquired from the old man about how it came into his possession and he stated Rocky and Bullwinkle left it there. I simply explained it was mine as was another and loaded them in my truck. It ate at me every time that POS car with my post neighbors went by. So I hatched a plan from a rotten egg. I went and bought a few gallons of gas, a few gallons of diesel fuel, and some other various oils. I made a concoction of these different chemicals and filled my new 6-gallon gas can I had to purchase. With some clean gas, I filled the lawn mower and cut some grass that evening, making sure Rocky and Bullwinkle saw me. Then I put everything away but forgot and left that rotten egg gas can out. I got up and went to work the next morning and didn't even think to check on the can. But when I got home, I checked and it was gone. My wife informed me that my plan must have worked as she watched Rocky and Bullwinkle go in and out with the car not only smoking, but spitting and sputtering as well. The last time they rode out, they didn't ride back in. They gave me about an hour of peace before they came over and wanted to know if I could look at the car and see what was wrong. If it could not be fixed on the side of the road, maybe tow it home. My response? I've had a long day and have a migraine. Maybe tomorrow. I saw the panic set in when I told them that. That's when they told me they had no insurance and it was on a main road. Tough luck. So the highway patrol did run across it and had it towed. It was going to cost them around $500 to get it out of impound, plus they had to have current registration and insurance. Car wasn't worth it. Well, they're those type of people that good luck just falls on them, and the pastor for a local church gave them an old for Taurus. Took me a few cans of rotten egg gas, but I got the motor to lock up after about a month. This time it quit in their grandparents' yard. So, they scrapped it, and as luck would have it, they got their income tax returns. They bought a nice-looking Ford F-150, but it began having problems too. Smoked really bad. They did take it to a mechanic that eventually found the problem. He got the truck running right again for about $1,500, and I have never had any more gas come up missing. Thanks for reading. But I didn't retire. My friend, I'll call her Sandy, worked at a travel agency in British Columbia, Canada. It was a small, owner-operated business with the owner and 3 employees, including my friend. Everyone worked Monday to Friday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. One of my friend's co-workers, I'll call her Jane, an older woman in her early to mid-60s, was a long-time nuisance employee. Among other sketchy behavior, Jane was always scamming ways to take time off over and above her official paid vacation time. In order to make up for the lost hours, she would claim overtime hours/pay by supposedly going into the office in her off hours to finish up work without being requested by the owner to do so. Despite being caught in her own lies on a number of occasions and being warned about trying to claim for unsanctioned overtime, the owner of the travel agency was reluctant to officially reprimand Jane or get rid of her. The reason being is the owner discovered after she had hired Jane that Jane had actually been fired from her previous job at another local travel agency for pulling the same stunts. However, Jane had sued her former employer for unfair dismissal and had won a settlement. After a few years of my friend Sandy working at the travel agency, the owner was ready to retire and offered to sell the business to my friend. Sandy took her up on the deal and took over the business while keeping on Jane and the other employee. Once again, just as the previous owner was afraid to get rid of Jane, so was Sandy for fear of being sued. When Sandy took over the business, she instituted guidelines regarding taking time off, and she established an official, no overtime, policy. Jane would still try with her shenanigans but was far less successful in getting what she wanted with my friend in charge. However, Jane still had one trick up her sleeve when she wanted to take time off on a whim. Sandy was a divorced single mom of 2 boys who were heavily involved in youth hockey. She would sometimes leave the office an hour or 2 before closing to get her boys to hockey practice or a game. In order to avoid requesting in person and potentially being denied, Jane would wait for Sandy to be out of the office to book a day off if she didn't feel like coming into work or had made plans. Sandy would then arrive at work the next morning only to discover that Jane wasn't coming in. Despite this happening a number of times, Sandy would usually let it slide since there was now a definite, no overtime, policy. Therefore, Jane could no longer claim to come into work on the weekend or after hours in order to try and make up for the day off. She would either miss out on a day's pay, in turn saving Sandy money as the owner, or it would come out of her remaining paid vacation days. Moreover, 2 people in the office at one time could usually handle everything. Jane not coming in was really a no-loss situation for Sandy. There was one time, however, when Sandy was going to be away for 1 or 2 work days just before the weekend to take her boys to a hockey tournament. She told both Jane and the other employee both verbally and in writing that they could not book time off for the dates in question since she would be away and needed both of them in the office. Within a few days of giving this notice, Sandy went into the office on a Saturday to do some paperwork and go through the sales for the week. This is when she discovered that, only the day before, Jane had booked a trip for her daughter and son-in-law to Las Vegas as well as a plane ticket in her name to Calgary where her daughter lived. Both the trip to Vegas and the ticket to Calgary coincided with the date Sandy would be out of the office. Sandy then checked the vacation booking schedule to further discover that Jane had indeed booked the days off that she had expressly been told she couldn't have. Not mentioning she had discovered the travel Jane had booked for herself and her daughter, Sandy emailed Jane telling her she would have to deny her the days off since she had already been told they were unavailable because she, Sandy, would be away and needed Jane in the office. Through a continued series of email exchanges, Jane replied and outright lied to Sandy with some excuse about her daughter getting some long-awaited medical treatment or surgery, and she needed to go to Calgary to help out for a few days and look after her granddaughter. Sandy replied to this lie by telling Jane she knew about the trip she had booked to Vegas for her daughter and son-in-law, that Jane's trip to Calgary was most likely to babysit her granddaughter while her daughter was in Vegas, and that she would still have to deny Jane the days off especially since she booked them after being told they were unavailable. Jane countered in her subsequent reply, without even addressing the fact that she had been caught in a lie, that she had been a dedicated employee of the travel agency for several years and couldn't understand why she was being treated so unfairly after all she had done for the business. She then wrote that since she wasn't being treated as a valued employee, she had no choice but to retire and was giving her 2 weeks' notice. Despite Jane's threat, Sandy replied that she would still be unable to grant her the days off and left it at that without making any mention of Jane's threat to quit/retire. Sandy then contacted her accountant, who also acted as her de facto business advisor, and explained what had happened with Jane. Also aware of Jane's previous shenanigans, Sandy's accountant told her that this was the out she had been looking for with Jane, and she had it all in writing. He told her that Jane had essentially resigned/retired and all Sandy needed to do was honor Jane's desire to do so, let her finish out her 2 weeks, or pay her 2 weeks' wages in lieu with no further severance pay legally required since she hadn't been fired. The following Monday, Sandy went into the office early accompanied by her long-term boyfriend to act as a witness. She put Jane's belongings from her desk into a box and took the things that were property of the business. Since Jane was old school and had resisted inputting client information in the computer database, this also included a small box filled with index cards which had client phone numbers, addresses, credit card information, and other personal information noted on them. In the meantime, the other employee had arrived for work, and they all waited for Jane to show up. Jane arrived just before 9 o'clock acting as though nothing had happened and greeted everyone with a "good morning" as she walked through the door. However, she was apparently taken slightly aback when she noticed Sandy's boyfriend seated in the far corner of the office. At this point, Jane was midway to her desk when Sandy informed her that there was no need to go any further and that she had accepted Jane's notification of retirement. She then handed Jane a check compensating her for the hours she had worked in the current pay period as well as 2 weeks' wages in lieu of Jane finishing out her final 2 weeks before her retirement. Jane was dumbfounded and went into panic mode, "But I didn't retire. I'm not ready to retire." Sandy responded that indeed she had retired, given her notice and had proof of it in writing. All Jane could do was continue repeating, "But I didn't retire. I'm not ready to retire," while unsuccessfully attempting to get the support of the other employee who refused to come to her defense. Sandy then pointed to the box containing Jane's belongings, wished her a happy retirement, and told her to leave the office. Jane quickly rifled through the box and noticed that the small box containing the index cards with client information was not there. She insisted that Sandy return it to her, which Sandy refused to do, explaining that it was property of the business, contained personal client information, and that she would be in violation of Canadian privacy laws if she were to let Jane take it. Jane's shock had now turned to obstinance and she refused to leave without the box. Both the other employee and Sandy's boyfriend had started to get involved, repeatedly telling Jane to just leave. Sandy then informed Jane that if she didn't leave, they would have to call the RCMP, Canadian Police, at which point, Sandy's boyfriend dialed 911 to inform the dispatcher of a disgruntled former employee at XYZ Travel Agency who was refusing to leave the premises. Within a few minutes, 2 police officers arrived, and Jane immediately ran to the door ranting about being fired and about the missing box of client info. In order to de-escalate the situation, one police officer told Jane to come outside and explain to him her side of the story. The other officer remained in the office to hear Sandy's side of the story, agreeing that Jane was not legally entitled to the box of client info. The other officer then re-entered the business and told Jane to wait outside. He said that Jane was insisting that Sandy was holding on to her personal belongings, namely a box of important information. Both Sandy and the officer who had spoken to her explained the contents of the box to the other officer, who in turn agreed it was not Jane's property. The police officers then picked up the larger box of Jane's personal belongings, took it outside to Jane, and told her she needed to go home. To rub salt in Jane's wounds, the next day, Sandy put up a large sign in the window of the business congratulating Jane on her retirement, and even put a small announcement in the local newspaper doing the same thing. The icing on the piece of revenge cake was Sandy, when filling out the necessary government forms for when an employee quits/gets fired/retires, made sure to check the box labeled "retired" for the reason for Jane no longer being employed. By doing so, Jane was ineligible to collect unemployment insurance benefits. My boss thought she could insult everyone, so I made her pay everyone for going on vacations. Last year I took a summer job for a kids' camp. It seemed to be quite well paid, and I wanted to try how working with kids goes. The hiring process was a little odd. As for the interview, I was called unexpectedly, and that woman, which was later my boss, spoke on the phone for about 5 hours plus and asked some really weird personal questions. For example, she asked, "You aren't a Covidiot, aren't you? Remember that, it will be a factor in the story." Anyway, I needed the money and it was the only callback I had gotten so far, so I took it. She then made us all come in 2 times before starting the job, so that she can explain it to us. Both times it went on the whole day, without being included in our payments because it was not mandatory. I got to be the boss of my team. Then first day came around and we faced 20+ children with their parents. But the boxes with the name lists, the toys, and everything weren't there. We basically improvised and wrote their names as they came and hoped that they are indeed signed up. Later the boxes arrived, but the contents were measly at best. She had given us 2 kinds of games, Uno and something else, bought it like 3 times. We got little instruments for the kids to decorate, but when she came around to check on us a few days later she screamed at us. The kids shouldn't have been allowed to take the instruments home, which she never said and made no sense. The next few days went on like this. She came around and screamed at us for doing something that made sense to every one of us and pretending she had instructed us otherwise at the unpaid, non-mandatory orientation meeting, which I attended every time. She just talked about her personal life, no instructions. She went on and offended every single person in existence. She doesn't want to have lactose intolerant or handicapped kids in the camp because they are too much of a hassle. My Muslim colleague got scolded for wanting to go home to her toddler after a 10-hour shift, and she asked her in front of everyone if her son still sucks on her titties, because else she doesn't have any reason to go home. Parents with questions or complaints are to be educated like kids because they behave like that when they didn't get F***ed by their wife the night before. Also, she made us work more than 12 hours without a break and sh**t on me. When I stood up and went home at 12 hours worked. We have a law that requires that here. But 2 events stood out when she went after the kids. On the first occasion, you have to remember that this woman has an unhealthy obsession with Corona. She not only changed the rules of everything anytime it fit her narrative, with us, she also did that with the parents, which led to misunderstandings. Every single day. So she asks the children, aged 4 to 10, which one had done an antigen test and who had a PCR test. Of course the children didn't all know what that is, and a little 5-year-old girl raised her hand for the false one. When the witch, my boss, noticed that, she gave this poor girl the scolding of her life and told her that she is dumb as a rock for not knowing the difference. Pretty sure this girl had spit in her face. I was so in shock, I probably should have slapped her for that, but I didn't. The girl tried hard to not cry and didn't come back the days after. The second incident was even more disturbing. A 4-year-old boy hit his head at the playground when they all were outside. I was back in the office when my colleagues came running. I called the boss while my colleague called the ambulance. When I told her that and how my colleague was already on the phone with the ambulance, she scolded me. But not because that boy got hurt, no. Because we called the ambulance. In her world it wasn't that bad and the father shouldn't find out, as if he was blind and wouldn't have seen the open wound anyway. The ambulance came, told us it was completely fine, even mandatory to call them in this case as an institution, and the boy suffered no further injury. He is fine now, thankfully. But I was furious. I was completely freaking out of anger. I had only worked there for 9 days and the kids as well as us had been abused enough. Instead of going after my impulse to call her back and tell her off, I calmed myself, and the next day, I didn't go to work but to the doctor. I explained her that my boss abuses me but I can't terminate the contract early, so to keep me from snapping she put me on a sick leave without end date. My boss was not amused when I sent her that doctor's notice, but I ignored her calls. I then proceeded to talk with my teammates and encouraged them to get sick leave and told them exactly what they can do and say to get that. They even tried to get rid of my Muslim coworker illegally. I explained to her that the paperwork from them is not legal and she should ignore it and also go on sick leave. So in about a 2-week frame my location had to replace all 6 people, including me, the boss there. And I took all records home too, so she couldn't just pass them on, also changed the password to my email account and did everything to piss her off. The story doesn't end here. As I found out, the word spread like a wildfire, and because she was such a piece of sh*t to everyone at every location, 1 month after the start she lost more than half of her staff, some of them still had to be paid sick leave. Apparently she called some of them and begged them to come back and offered bonuses as high as double the pay and still got nobody to come back to help. The silver lining was that the parents also had enough and many kids were taken out of that camp. So end of July was there, I was on vacation sick leave and she calls. She proceeds to tell me, suspiciously calm, that if I don't want to come back next month I should her now please, and she offered to end my contract without further obligations and with my payment for the whole month of July. I tell her about how I'm coming back, because I really want to get better and other bullsh*t. And of course I just didn't, and I proceeded to collect 1 additional full month of sick leave, without even ever speaking to her directly again. I also went out of my way to continue offering information for every single staff member of all locations that wanted to leave and still get paid or wanted to know where they can report her. So in the end this is what she got for being a disrespectful. She lost half or more of her workers. Everyone hates her and wants nothing to do with her, really bad publicity included. She had to pay me the full 2 months, my vacation time out in money, which is quite expensive for them, as I didn't take it, because I was so sick, pay my overtime and the mandatory bonus you get for doing extra hours, all this multiplied by 6 at least, I got around €6,000 for 9 days of work from them. Her entire enterprise went downhill. Of course I also had to get my money through legal support, so that came onto her too. I can't explain how much detail I put in the legal planning, so to get all the people paid out as much as possible, without any chance of legal repercussions ever. My ass is safer than safe, she will not ever be able to retaliate on what I did there. I studied law for a while and got everything double-checked by professionals. She tried to harass me, I blocked her. But I heard she read my personal information to the other colleagues who stayed there and called me all possible names. So if she should ever even try to sue me or blackmail me, I have evidence and witnesses for trying to dox me, insulting me and various other. Honestly, after I wrote that down now, I'm kind proud but also surprised at how nicely all that worked out. I didn't see any listing searching for that project this year, so hopefully that went downhill and I hope she went back to hell where she came from unemployed. And sorry for any errors, it's 5 a.m. and I just wrote all that inspired by other stories here. Thought it fits here nicely. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.